Before we get started, if you could just give me your first and last name and the correct spelling so I have it on the videotape.
Joan Quigley,
Mm-hmm.
Joanquigley.
And you grew up, where did you actually grow up?
I grew up out at Joyce, which is 15 miles west of here.
It's on the way to Nia Bay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I went through it.
Yeah.
Is it before, is it Pisht?
It's before, yes, it's before that name.
And am I saying that right?
You
Or
are, you are. Mm-hmm.
I wondered if
it's
there's
an Indian name, and I don't know what it means, but it is an Indian name,
I
which
thought
is.
it meant, Psht, come here. Psht.
No, it's it, but it's a little, and the school, the new school, or we call it the new school, but the school where I went to school was a beautiful 2-story red brick school, very beautiful school, but they tore it down.
And they don't build schools like that anymore.
No, they don't. It was a shame that they had to tear it down, but that was where, and the grade school was in the bottom, the main floor, and then the high school was up above on the second floor, and then the gym was in the middle.
Wow.
So it was a neat school, a small school, and we had wonderful, dedicated teachers and a wonderful, good education. We were able to leave and go to college and get honors programs very easily because we had such that one-on-one almost with our teachers.
It's amazing what a different time it is. We're struggling with our education these days.
I think smaller is better.
I agree wholeheartedly. Were you here then when Pearl Harbor happened?
Yes, I was. I was in the 6th grade. And on Pearl Harbor Day, I was playing with my cousin down the road, and they had their radio on. And Uncle Henry said, he said, we're in the war. And of course, that didn't mean a thing to me, really. So I went home and told Mom and and Dad said, well, it couldn't be, and turned on the radio, and of course it was. And my mom started crying. And I thought, my grandma had died, her mom had died a year ago, just almost to the day in December. And I thought, oh, Mom is sad, because she's remembering Grandma. Because, we'd all cry when we remembered her because she was such a dear lady. So that's what I thought she was crying. But, of course, the next day was, when we went to school, the reality set in. And when we had a teacher named Mrs. Wilder in the 5th and 6th grade. They taught combined classes. And she was a German lady, beautiful lady, most beautiful smile. Tough teacher, but good teacher. And they broadcast President Roosevelt's speech, upstairs in the assembly room with the high school kids. But she had us tiptoe down to the foot of the stairs so we could listen to the speech. And she said, she made us promise to be very quiet. And she said, this is a day that's going to change your lives forever. This is the most important day that you will ever spend so far. You must listen. And she said, this is going to change your life. And I think I could have quoted his speech later because I listened so, the day that will live in infamy. So that was my school memory of that. But when Mom went to town that morning, already the Elwha Bridge had, the soldiers were there and stopped her and searched the car. They had the old Elwha one-lane bridge. They had soldiers at either end, and coming to town you were searched, and then coming back you were searched at the other end. I imagine they thought maybe they'd blow up the bridge, I don't know. But there were soldiers everywhere right away.
I wonder if they thought you were smuggling Japanese.
I don't know, but they had blackouts. We had to put blankets up over our windows at night, and they cut the power. I don't know how long, but they cut it to 60%. I don't know what it did to refrigerators or things, but they were very. The school could have no events at night because we'd have to have lights, and you couldn't cover up all the windows in the school. So everything was in the afternoon, any games or any graduations or kind of cut out dances, because they'd have to have day dances. So,
kind of hurts the dating scene.
I suppose so. Life was earnest, I guess. But then Camp Hayden, came about down at Crescent Beach, Crescent Bay, and that was off limits. And there was I don't know how many men were down there, but there was a barracks and there was a full-blown army camp down there, and they had gun emplacements. They're still there. The gun emplacements are still there. You know, and they had big cavernous rooms where there were where they could have had hospital set up and for I don't know, emergencies. You know, it was we were muchly touched by the war on the West Coast because they had to cover the lights. Dad worked in the logging camp, and he worked out on the West End, and they had to drive with well, they're not cat size, but they had to do something to the lights so that they couldn't be seen from the air.
Wow.
At night. Right. It was I think I talked to kids when I went to school, you know, that lived inland, and I don't think they had they didn't have those things happen. I don't think they realized as much about the war. But I think we all thought that we were probably going to be invaded. And you know, I think we could have been. We were that vulnerable right at first.
Well, they talk about the Japanese subs off the coast,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, yeah, you're prime target if they were gonna come in, especially after the fear of the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor.
Right. Actually, I think there was a sister of a man from Port Angeles who was killed by a random bomb down at Seaside with a Sunday school class. I think his name was Larry Winters, and I think it was his sister who was. And that kind of brought it close to home, too, you know.
That was one of the balloon bombs?
You know, I'm not sure whether it was randomly fired from a ship or a sub.
Because somebody yesterday, and I'm going to have to do a little research on it because his memory wasn't quite as good, but he was talking about these balloon bombs that they sent over.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure just whether it was that or whether it was a random gun, you know, that they were just shooting randomly at the coast.
So you were in 6th grade, just in
Mm-hmm.
elementary school,
Mm-hmm.
but yet you still were that aware of really what?
Oh, very muchly aware, very muchly. And Mom became a plane spotter, you know, volunteer plane spotter, and she'd have the silhouettes of the different planes, and she'd be working out in the yard, or if she was in the house, and she'd hear a plane, and she'd drop everything and get the old, you know, binoculars and look at the plane, and then she had to mark down which direction it was going and what kind of a plane it was. But there were a lot of those that, you know, that was all voluntary. And then Red Cross drives, you know, she was on the Red Cross drives and war bond drives.
Do you, when she wrote down all the information for the planes, do you know what she did with it after she?
You know, I've been thinking about that because we didn't have a phone. But she must have had to have gone on a very regular basis probably down to the Joy store, which was the closest phone, I'm thinking. All I do is remember is her spotting planes. I don't remember what she did with the information, but she must have gone down to the Joy store or to the nearest phone, which wouldn't have been on our road. Nobody on our road had a phone. We didn't have phones until, you know, after the war.
Because you wonder if it's one of those things where they had everybody writing these things down and they just kept notebooks and, you know, somebody must have.
But yes, I'm sure that they dispensed with that information someplace to find out, you know, where the planes were coming and going to and from. But I used to lie awake at night and hear the planes, and I just was sure that we were going to be bombed, you know. I thought they were going to come over us like they did in Pearl Harbor. And I think I was 12 years old or so. I think most kids felt that way, you know. The war was closer to us, I think, than to lots of areas.
Yeah, I would imagine, yeah. Especially, I never thought about it at that age of 12, 13, 11 years old, seeing what happened in Pearl Harbor, and yeah, having that fear of going to bed at night thinking, what's going to happen here?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then I was in high school then when, of course, President Roosevelt was the president during all that time, and very much honored, you know, and his speech was, well, like I said, it made such an impression on us because, partially because our teacher made sure that we knew how important it was. And I remember the day he died, for example, you know, that one of the kids in high school said that he had passed away, and they immediately ran out and lowered the flag to half-staff, you know, so that was the era that I grew up in.
It's amazing when you think about those life experiences like that you know where you were, what you did, because it was so, I don't know if you realize you're a part of history at that time. Or... I don't think anybody does at the time, do they?
Except for a teacher who might say, remember this, you know.
See, that's what is so amazing, is that your teacher knew enough and to let the students know. That's a friend of mine teaches here, and we were talking last night, and he was talking to his kids. He said something about Mount St. Helens, and they said, what? He said, well, yeah, I'd hiked up there, and I'd been up there before, and we were there, near there on the day of, and they were so amazed because that was a big historical, and Tim thought,
my.
well, that's weird, but I guess it is a historical event.
Oh, right. Well, you know, it even touched us in Montana, Mount St. Helens, because the ash fell and we had school closed for 2 days in the central part of Montana because of the ash. It was like like a sun eclipse. You know, right?
I was in Pullman at the time.
Oh, were you?
Oh, yeah.
Were you? Is that where you went to school?
That's one of my schools.
Oh, yeah.
I was on the College of Year program, so I finished at Wazoo, and then after I toured for a couple of years, I went back to Eastern and
So you're a Cheney grad.
Yeah.
Ah.
So, yeah.
Now, what year did you grad?
Oh, I went back to Cheney in '84, something like that, and I was '81 over in Wazoo.
Good school.
I loved it.
I loved it.
It's the best. Did. People ask me where they should go to learn video and all that, and I tell them they go to Cheney. And again, it's a small school.
Mm-hmm. Our grandson is in communication there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in communication. He's on the honors program.
Well,
he just started this year.
He knows Dr. Dave.
Well,
You'll impress him and say, you know, how's Dr. Tuishi doing? Dr. Dave, David Tuishi.
David Tuishi. I will remember to tell him.
I'll tell you, if he's a gem. I mean, what he taught kids that were willing to learn was better than... And see, Wazoo is known for video. And I was at Wazoo doing theater, and kind of went over and looked at the video department, and there was nothing. And when I went to work with Dr. Dave, it was like, when he left, he does a summer program on top of the school one, and a lot of students there, when you do 4 shows in the summer, and you either know that you're going to make it or not going to make it when you get done. I liked it over there. Do you remember where you were when you heard the bomb had been dropped?
Well, I must have been summertime. It was summertime. I remember it was August, and Mother was canning. She did all summer long, and we heard about it, and then we heard about the second one, and then we happened to be in Port Angeles the day that the war ended. And if that wasn't a wild and crazy time, that was wonderful.
What was that like?
Oh, it was great. There were servicemen. There must have been sailors. I don't know, Coast Guardsmen are, you know, and there were people on Front Street. You couldn't drive a car. There were, you know, everyone was just, it was just a big party. It was just wonderful. Mother had gone to town and I think it was a Sears Roebuck office. She must have been going to either make an order or pick up an order, and we had to walk there because there was no way you could drive a car. It was, you know, it was wonderful. It was just a great time. People were very much relieved, I think.
Everybody knew everybody.
I think so. Yeah.
Was the harbor? Did you come into town enough? Or, well, is Joyce on the coast or is it in?
No, it's off the coast.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
it's in.
we're just up from Crescent Beach is right to the north of Joyce.
So you didn't see ships, Navy ships coming and going, or did you end up?
Well, actually, we could see the straits from our house, so yes, we did. We did. We could see any ship that would come into Seattle, we could see go by our house.
Boy, that must have been an interesting perspective as a child to see that, to see these.
Right, but you know, a lot of times they were at night. They did night runs, so people didn't see them.
Huh.
But that was it was a really, like, it is true, it was an historical time, and we didn't, we just lived it. Like you do all things and then think about it later, I guess.
And that's the interesting thing. I mean, that is, I talked to a gentleman yesterday, and he was standing at the runway in Tinian and Goa Gay landed, and he said there were brass all over the place, and he thought they were going to go in for the invasion. Well, it just come back from dropping the bomb.
Oh my goodness.
And I asked him, I said, well, did you realize? And then he found out later, not, you know, an hour later, what it was, what had happened. He said, no, I was just thinking about getting home to see my daughter. You know, he says, years later, you look back and you think, wow, I was right there. But that's it. It is, and I think that's one of the hardest things to get across, that even though war went on, there is this, life goes on at the same time.
Right.
You know?
Right. My sister wrote to a fellow just to be, you know, like you were, she was older and she was writing to servicemen. She ended up marrying him. You know, he had been stationed at Port Townsend, or near Port Townsend, and she had met him through my other sister's husband, because they had gone, I know he'd met him and gone hunting together or something, but he was sent to the Japanese theater, and so she just was being, you know, patriotic and writing of home to him, and they ended up getting married. So I imagine a lot of those things happened too, you know, so I got a neat brother-in-law out of that one.
Boy, that's neat. I mean, so that was kind of their courtship.
Yes. I mean, he was in the Japanese theater for 3 years. He didn't even come home till VJ Day, so, and he was one of the first troops to be over there. So, you know, she wrote for several years. See, 3 years. They wrote back and forth, and he ended up getting married.
Well, that's amazing, the bond that must have been formed because of the experiences that he was facing, and to be able to have that piece of home that...
I think that's probably why he treasured that writing back and forth. You know, it was a piece of normalcy and all that, because that was a terrible theater of war. I think it was I think anybody would agree that it was worse than the European theater.
I've been trying to, as I talk to the different people and listen to them, and yeah, because of this sneakiness, and you know, you think of being cold being bad, but being over in this hot,
The
where you
jungle.
blister and raw, no.
Right.
I don't think I want to be at either one of them. Although I know where I want to be a POW. We interviewed one gentleman, they got shot down over Germany, and the pilot came on and said, we're going down, where do you want us to put it down, in Germany or Sweden? And they all said Sweden, and that's where they ended up in a prisoner of war camp, was in Sweden. It was in a summer resort. They were given a stipend. They could go into town, do a little bistro, and sit and have a little coffee and all that. And finally the Swedes came out and said, okay, you guys are going to be escaping next week, and the pilot will be here tomorrow to talk to you. He came, and the captain met with him, and they went into the main airport and checked through customs and got on the plane and flew out.
Oh my goodness.
So it's like, well, okay.
Prison of war camp of choice.
Yeah, exactly. So, now they didn't treat the Germans as nice, though. The Germans were kept somewhere else, and so they weren't.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a message from World War II for your great? Because I know you have a great grandchild, if I remember. Do you have a
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a great friend. One.
For the great grandchildren that you and I'll never meet, that this is going to be a history book somewhere that they read, and to give a reality to what war.
Not to forget that if we're not careful, we can repeat the horrible parts of our history. And I think man is capable of horrible things. I think we can relate it to even in a Christian sense, that if we don't follow the precepts of Christ, we are going to we're going to do it again. And I see the debaseness of our world, and we're not immune from it. In fact, I think in some ways America is the leader of it, because we are so free, and the freedom is not responsible. It's not responsible freedom. And if you're going to be free, you have to be responsible. So I think that's probably what I think, because everybody goes through bad times, and those who stayed home didn't really have it near as bad as those who were over there, and the women who got the message from the War Department and put the gold star. I mean, there was one woman in our hometown that had 2 gold stars, 2 sons that she lost. That was the horrible part of it. But the people who went over there, that, you know, in World War II or in any war, really, they have such memories that I think they have a lesson to teach us all, and we have to make sure that lesson is passed on, I think.
I talked to a gentleman over in Kashmir, and the gold star was if they're killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then was it a star or a flag that they hung if they had a son?
A blue star, I think.
Star.
A blue star, I think.
Well, he was an only son, and his mom wanted a blue star. He was 4F and wasn't going to go in, but his mom was mad because she wanted a blue star. And he's like, give me a break, Mom, you know, so. But that had to, boy, especially in such a small community like that,
It was.
Because it wasn't just her children, I mean, basically it had to be the community's children.
Oh, yes. I think in a small community, you know, you all are so close. But I don't know, because I wasn't, I guess I wasn't too aware of anybody from around here who was killed. I do remember when the Battle of Bastogne was being fought, and talking to people who knew that their loved ones must be there, hadn't heard from them, and were, you know, that was a very bad Christmas all over. I mean, I think, you know, there were a lot of tears shed in the States during that Christmas season when that battle was going on, because it was such a tenuous thing whether we were going to win that battle. And I think even as a kid, I remember wondering too, you know, whether we were.
Boy, that's interesting. And then to marry somebody that.
That was there. Did you wandering around behind the enemy lines and didn't even know it?
He said, we were asking some people, and then we thought maybe we were where we weren't supposed to be. But again, there's the surreal aspect of war.
Right.
We all think that it's this very organized, but you think of these thousands of people running around, and who knows who's where.
Right. And his buddy was fiddling with that hand grenade and saying, well, probably I should throw this away. Tossed it over the hedge and it blew. You know? I mean, how...
I think we had a lot of lucky soldiers.
I think so.
Looked out over there.
You know, one thing that I remember as a kid was, you know, sugar was rationed, of course. And Mom did a lot of canning, as I said, and canning with honey. I remember there was somebody out at Forks that had fireweed honey, and it's a wonderful honey, but it's darker than some honey, and that was readily available. And Mom she used to win prizes for her cakes at the fair, and she learned to make a honey cake, which was heavier. I don't know whatever happened to that recipe. It's a good recipe, but she probably tossed that after the war too. She's probably so glad that it was over with. But that was a wonderful cake. But canning with honey made like for example peaches, it made them darker, and they weren't as pretty, you know. But sugar was rationed, and you know this was a Scandinavian community, and to have coffee rationed was a very, you know, that was bad, because I don't remember how much we were allotted for coffee. We used to get Airway coffee from Safeway and grind it in the thing, at Safeway, and then bring it home and make that last a long time. But I can remember we used to walk a mile to the mailbox, and Mom and I would walk, when I wasn't in school, we'd walk down to get the mail. And there's this Scandinavian lady named Mrs. Nyholm, and on her way back, she'd come out and wave a coffee cup, and she'd say, now, come and have coffee. She says, it's real coffee. It wasn't watered down or grounds poured over again, so we'd have to go and celebrate having a real cup of coffee. And that was my very first taste of coffee was, she let me taste coffee at her house. And I was just, boy, seventh heaven, just a little kid, and I got to have real coffee during the war. But those kinds of things, that kids remember.
So even out there, because I know it's real interesting, the rationing in different places.
Mm-hmm.
People faced it and people didn't face it.
Mm-hmm.
So at the Joyce story?
Probably. That's where we did a lot of, or down into Safeway in Port Angeles, when we did go to town. Mm-hmm. That was where we got the Airway coffee from, was from there. And shoes were rationed. And that was kind of tough if you were becoming a teenager and you wanted a pretty pair of shoes, but Mom could send for the ones that weren't rationed from National Ballast catalog, and they cost not very much, and you wouldn't dare get them wet because, they'd kind of fall apart. But you didn't use those for school shoes, but you could use those for, for Sunday shoes. So I don't know how many pairs of shoes that we were allotted. Probably one pair every, maybe, I don't know. How did they, that part didn't.
Because that's Mom and Dad took
That
care of
that was their problem, except when I wanted a pair of party shoes, I know we had to go to National Ballast and get cheap ones that didn't have to have a ration stamp. I suppose because of the leather.
The leather, or maybe even the rubber.
I bet.
Might have been too.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear what different people missed because of the rationing. We talked to one woman and it was ketchup.
Oh my goodness.
And she loved ketchup, and she saved her stamps. When she got a bottle of it, and she'd come home and she dropped it, and it broke. And she said she just sat down and just cried because
no more ketchup until she saved up some more ration stamps.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we had a woman in this morning, and she worked in the shipyards, but she also took a job at a restaurant for 4 hours a day because she could get whatever she wanted to eat on her shift.
Oh, sure.
I thought, there's that Yank ingenuity again out
Right.
there.
I don't blame her. That sounds like a good idea.
It's interesting to see how the people adapted and to wonder if we were to face that again, what our society would.
I think we would. I think we would. We lived on we had a farm. It was stump ranch, how they all call them out here, and Dad worked out, but we had our own butter and eggs and meat. And I don't know if those were rationed or not. I suppose they were, but we didn't have to worry about that because we had those things, and we made do well. We did, we were very fortunate.
Now, your dad was a timber?
Mm-hmm. He was a logger.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember, so did he get home, was he gone all day and home late at night?
He was gone all week.
Okay, so he went out to the camps.
Right, he went out to the West End, to the different logging camps out there. And usually he would come home on Friday night and leave Sunday afternoon.
So you would have maybe Saturday dinner together?
Sunday dinner.
Oh, so he would have
Always
a Sunday supper?
That Sunday dinner was an early dinner, and then he'd leave for the camp. That was my growing up years.
Do you remember during the war, was it a family that discussed the war and things like that? Do you remember your dad talking about it, or?
Yes, they talked about it, but I don't know that it was table conversation. I think when Dad came home, it was so nice that he was there. Mom would say, "Well, save all your papers so Daddy can see them." She was, he gave the orders, but she carried him out. It was they were a wonderful team, and so we'd talk about our school activities and that more at the table, more than the war. It was not a thing that we talked about as much at the table, for example.
Wasn't a political
No, no. I liked it that way. I think that was good, you know.
Now, did you have brothers and sisters?
I had two sisters. Or we had a brother, but he passed away. Actually, he died in 1918. Dad was a spruce logger, and there were Army soldiers in the spruce camps. They were cutting spruce, and the soldiers got that flu, and Mother said she can remember them being carried out like cordwood at 4 o'clock in the morning on the railroad flat cars. And my brother was just a tiny little guy, and he used to go down and play with the soldiers. And they said he died of diphtheria, but it was probably flu, because in 1918, you know, that was that horrible flu that hit everywhere. Maybe that's one reason why Mom was crying when the war was declared. Maybe it brought back those memories, you know, that here we are again, you know. They thought that was the war to end all wars, and in her lifetime here was another war, you know.
Boy, you look at what your parents had to face. I mean, you come out of the Depression, World War I, Depression,
Mm-hmm.
World War II,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to give up their families, to give up.
Oh, and Dad lost his job in the war, in the Depression. You know, there was no work. And my sister almost died, and there were doctor bills, and, you know, and then I was born. You know? So it was, yeah, that generation really, I think they probably really hated to see that war, the Second World War come.
They knew what the travesty was.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It's weird because there's that bittersweet. There also was that it also lifted us out of the Depression and brought jobs.
That's true.
But, you know, at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
So how did your dad survive through the Depression then? He lost his...
He looked and looked and looked for work, and we had a mortgage on the place, and he finally went into the banker in here in Port Angeles. I think his name was Phillips. And he said, I can't find work. And he said, you're going to have to take the place, I guess. And he said, Jim, he said, here's your mortgage. He said, it's in my top drawer. I'll leave it here until you can start paying.
Wow.
And so, thanks to that friendly banker, they're not so friendly anymore, I guess, but Dad...
Sad, isn't it?
Yes, but Dad did find work, and he'd cut pulpwood and then went back to work. And then when he did go back to work, that's when he started working farther and farther away from home as the timber was, you know, so... But it was work, and it was, you know, he was a high climber where he topped trees, you know, that scary type thing. So.
See, now I know why you thought a banker was okay. I see how this... It's interesting, the tangled web you created, because he could be a banker or a teacher were the two options they gave him, and he knew he was going to marry a teacher, so he figured he'd be a banker.
I guess so, except that did you tell he was also a farmer, and I'll tell you, a Montana wheat farmer is the biggest gambler in the whole world.